The studio was quiet, too quiet for a segment teased all week as a legal reckoning. Jeanine Pirro sat poised, eyes narrowed, lips curled in the familiar smirk that usually preceded a verbal takedown. Across from her sat Karoline Leavitt, confident but calm, her expression unreadable. What viewers didn't know. Karoline came in not just to defend herself, but to detonate a truth bomb that had been simmering behind the scenes. As the camera panned in, Piro wasted no time. "Karoline," she said sharply, "do you deny that your campaign organization has violated federal transparency laws? Because the evidence points to $100 million in misallocated donor funds." The air left the room. Karoline blinked once, then leaned in. "I don't deny there's corruption," she replied. "But I'm not the one hiding it behind a gavel and a glass of scotch." The control room buzzed. Producers leaned forward. This wasn't going to be a debate, it was a showdown. Jeanine pressed on. "Let me be clear. A $100 million civil suit is in motion. That's not political theater, that's justice catching up." Karoline smiled. "Justice? Jeanine, you've built a career pointing fingers while guarding your own secrets with NDAs and off-the-record deals. If you want to talk about exposure, I brought receipts. Speech balloon, would you side with someone who hides behind power, or someone willing to risk it all to speak up?" Jeanine's eyes flickered for a second, her composure cracking. "Are you threatening me?" "No," Karoline said softly, placing a thick folder on the table. "I'm liberating the truth." The folder, still sealed, was a promise. A threat. A declaration that whatever Jeanine had planned was about to backfire on live television, and in front of millions. The camera operator's hand shook. The host's team began checking legal lines through their earpieces. And Karoline? She sat still, unwavering. Jeanine Pirro tried to regain control. "We're not here for political grandstanding," she snapped. "This is about facts. Legal documents. Federal investigations." Karoline didn't flinch. She gently opened the folder on the table, revealing what looked like a mix of financial statements, email transcripts, and, most damning of all, signed memos bearing Jeanine's name. "You're right, Judge," Karoline said evenly. "Let's stick to the facts." Jeanine leaned forward, trying to assess the documents without looking rattled. Her jaw tightened. The studio crew sensed it. This wasn't the confident firebrand they were used to seeing. For the first time, Piro looked cornered. Karoline continued, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. "You accused me of fraud, with no investigation completed, no court decision, just headlines. But what about your role on the Board of Justice Now PAC? The same PAC that rerouted $8.4 million into undeclared consulting fees, all under your supervision?" A stunned silence swept across the set. "And let's not forget," Karoline added, "you publicly championed financial integrity, while those funds conveniently landed in a firm owned by your former campaign manager's brother." Jeanine tried to cut her off. "That's a baseless conspiracy." Karoline raised an eyebrow. "Then maybe you'd like to explain the email you sent on April 14 at 2:13 p.m. Subject line, keep it quiet, she's getting too close." The screen behind them suddenly displayed the email. The audience gasped. "Is this your idea of transparency?" Karoline asked, voice rising just slightly. "Because to me, it smells like projection." Here's the question. When political power turns into personal protection, who really holds the truth, and who's just hoping we never ask the right questions? Jeanine's legal team started whispering furiously off camera. The network's execs scrambled behind the scenes. This wasn't just an explosive moment, it was a live implosion. And Karoline? She sat with the poise of someone who came not to survive the storm, but to be it. Jeanine Pirro adjusted her earpiece and glanced off camera. The control room was in chaos. Legal advisors, PR reps, and producers all scrambling, but none of them could mute what was unfolding live. Then came the pivot. "You want to throw accusations, sweetheart?" Jeanine said, her voice low and venom-laced. "Let's talk about your husband. His shell company received $2.1 million last year from a donor who sits on a weapons board. Do you want to explain that connection?" Karoline didn't blink. "You're throwing pebbles at a mountain, Jeanine," she replied. "The payment was disclosed, fully. Yours weren't." And then Piro dropped the nuclear bomb. "You know what? I've spoken to my attorneys. You've defamed me on national television. My legal team will be filing for damages, $100 million. Consider this your official notice." The studio went quiet. Even the camera operator froze. But Karoline smiled. A slow, steady smile. "Ah, there it is, the panic playbook. When the truth gets too loud, you try to sue it into silence." She turned to the camera, addressing not just Jeanine, but millions of viewers. "Ask yourself, if I were lying, why threaten me with a fine instead of disproving my facts? Why go after me with money instead of integrity? Have we reached a point where the powerful would rather bankrupt the truth than be confronted by it?" She faced Piro again. "Go ahead and sue me. But be warned, a lawsuit opens your books, too. Discovery won't just dig into my claims. It'll tear through your carefully curated facade." Jeanine's face turned pale. "And you know what?" Karoline added, voice crisp, almost cold. "I dare you." The crowd in the studio audibly gasped. The courtroom-style lights above them felt like spotlights on a stage too hot to stand under. Karoline wasn't backing down. She was escalating. The camera's red light stayed locked on Karoline. She didn't flinch. She leaned forward, hands clasped, tone cool, calculated. "Jeanine," she said, each syllable deliberate, "you're threatening legal action in front of millions, but are you ready for what that really means?" Piro blinked. For a brief second, her usual composure cracked. "Because once that paperwork's filed," Karoline continued, "I get to subpoena every private message, email, donor communication, and staff memo you've tried to bury. Every single one." She paused, just long enough for the tension to ripple through the room. "Maybe we start with that night in Palm Beach. Or the shell pack you used to move funds between properties. Or better yet, that little offshore account you never disclosed." Was Karoline bluffing, or did she know more than anyone expected? Piro's team off-camera frantically gestured, one producer mouthing, "Cut," but no one dared touch the broadcast. It had become its own beast. Jeanine sat frozen. Her signature courtroom dominance crumbled under the weight of public accountability. "You went after me," Karoline said, voice rising just enough to echo. "You used media to shape a false narrative, weaponized your influence, and when facts stood taller than fear, you threatened to sue?" She held up a folder, thick, marked in bold red, unsealed. "This is what your lawsuit will unlock," Karoline added. "Not a smear campaign. Evidence. Not hearsay. Receipts. So, I'll ask you now, do you really want to go to court, or are you hoping I'll shut up first?" The audience, stunned, was silent. Then, from somewhere in the back, a slow clap began. Then another, and another. Karoline let the moment breathe. Jeanine, flustered, began to reach for her mic, but paused. The tables had turned, and Karoline? She wasn't just fighting back, she was dismantling the legacy that once tried to crush her. Jeanine Pirro tried to recover. She straightened her blazer, cleared her throat, and forced a smirk. "Oh please," she scoffed, "you think threatening me with your little folder scares anyone?" But Karoline didn't blink. She let Jeanine finish her sentence, and then lowered the boom. "You think this is just about you, Jeanine," she said, her voice calm but cold. "This is about what you represent, the exact kind of corruption that's made Americans stop trusting people like you." There was no yelling, no theatrics. Just a steady, unshakable delivery that cut deeper than shouting ever could. "I may be young, I may be underestimated. But I know when someone's hiding behind power because they're terrified of the truth. And right now, you're sweating bullets behind that desk." The audience gasped, not because it was loud, but because it was true. The studio lights glinted off Jeanine's glass, now half empty. Her hand, steady just minutes ago, trembled as she adjusted her mic. Karoline leaned in, her tone sharpening like a blade. You didn't expect me to show up prepared. You didn't expect me to punch back. But here I am, not playing defense, not running. Standing here, publicly, calling out your threats for what they are, distractions. Then she turned to the camera. This is the problem with legacy media, she said. They pretend to protect the people, but they're just protecting themselves. Their empires, their reputations, their wallets. And then came the line no one expected. So let me make this very clear. If you're going to find me, sue me, or drag my name through the mud, you better be ready to burn with me. The air froze. Even Jeanine's co-hosts, usually ready to jump in, sat frozen. Would you have expected a political commentator to drop that kind of line live? Let us know in the comments. Karoline didn't wait for permission. She stood. She didn't storm off, she walked off with purpose, leaving her mic on the table and a stunned silence in her wake. The clip would go viral in under 10 minutes. By the time the credits rolled, it wasn't Jeanine's show anymore. By the next morning, the explosion wasn't just trending, it was everywhere. Clips of Karoline's line, "You better be ready to burn with me," echoed across social platforms like a war cry. Commentators on both sides couldn't ignore it. Even hosts who usually dismissed her were forced to admit, she took control of the room and flipped the script. And Jeanine? She was cornered. Her PR team scrambled to contain the blaze. A formal statement was issued. Judge Piro stands by her remarks and believes in the legal system's ability to address misconduct. But no one was buying it. Karoline's team dropped receipts the same day. Financial ties. Back-channel correspondences. Leaked memos. It was no longer just a war of words, it was a war of truth versus reputation. Inside conservative circles, people were whispering. Was Jeanine out of line? Did she go too far? Was this a political move or a personal vendetta? Karoline, meanwhile, remained calculated. She didn't post a long rant. She posted a single message. Truth doesn't need a press release. Just air it out loud enough and watch the guilty panic. Have you ever seen someone take control of their own narrative this boldly? Mainstream media attempted spin, but the damage was done. Jeanine's credibility wasn't just dented, it was cracking. One panelist even asked on air, "Is this the end of the old guard?" And suddenly, that wasn't just a question, it felt like a shift. Karoline wasn't the one on trial anymore. Jeanine was. And Karoline knew it. That's when she announced the press conference. She promised the documents, the proof, the people, and most of all, the story behind the $100 million fine that nearly became the biggest media scandal of the year. Karoline didn't budge. Instead, she walked straight up to the mic with a fire in her step that made the entire audience lean forward. Jeanine, still holding her legal pad like a shield, watched her closely, eyes narrowed, calculating. Karoline's voice rang out, calm, steady, but packed with grit. "You can throw a fine at me. You can slap my name across your headlines. But what you can't do, is erase the truth." The room went dead silent. "This isn't just about me," Karoline continued, turning slightly toward the crowd. "This is about every young woman who's ever been told to sit down and shut up because she had the guts to challenge someone older, richer, or louder. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to." Jeanine tried to interject, but Karoline didn't stop. "You call me reckless. You accuse me of defamation. But let's talk about the decades of fear-mongering you've made a career out of. Let's talk about your truth, Judge." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. "Isn't it funny," Karoline said with a sharp smile, "how quickly people throw around lawsuits when they feel exposed? You want to bury me in court fees, drown me in bad press, and label me as unhinged. But here I am. Still standing, still talking. And judging by your reaction, you don't like that very much." Jeanine's jaw clenched. Her response was short. "You'll regret saying that." Karoline didn't blink. "Will I? Or are you just not used to people talking back?" At that, the crowd erupted. Some clapped. Some gasped. Others stood in stunned silence. And that's when Karoline delivered the line that would go viral before the segment even ended. "You want to find me for telling the truth? Good. Send the bill. I'll frame it." The clip spread across social media like wildfire within hours. Hashtags like #SendTheBill and #TruthCostsMillions started trending. Commentators from both sides weighed in, some calling Karoline a PR genius, others labeling her dangerous. But no one, absolutely no one, ignored her. Jeanine's team was forced to issue a statement by the next morning, walking back some of the legal threats and claiming it was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But the damage was already done. Karoline didn't just survive the ambush, she turned it into her own stage. And that's when people started asking themselves, was this the beginning of a new political era, or the unraveling of the old guard? Karoline took a deep breath, scanning the room like a prosecutor about to deliver the final blow. Jeanine Pirro was seated across from her, stone-faced, lips tightly pressed, fingers clenched around her prepared notes like a lifeline. The cameras were rolling, but the air was electric. Every single person in the room knew something big was coming. Karoline leaned forward slightly, her voice lower now, measured, deliberate, but every word sliced through the silence like a blade. "You threatened me with a $100 million fine because I made you uncomfortable. Because I hit a nerve, but let's stop pretending this is about money." Jeanine shifted in her seat. "This is about power. And fear. And control. You thought you could intimidate me into silence. That your title, your legal threats, and your public platform would be enough to make me disappear." She paused. They weren't. The audience didn't dare move. A few glanced toward Jeanine to see how she would react, but Karoline didn't give her a chance. "I may not have a law degree. I may not have spent years shouting behind a desk on cable news. But I do have something you lost a long time ago, conviction." That line landed hard. Even the cameraman flinched a bit behind the lens. Jeanine finally opened her mouth to speak, but Karoline raised a single finger. Not in anger, just calm, commanding authority. "You said I was dangerous. You're right. But not in the way you think. I'm dangerous because I won't be bought. I'm dangerous because I've looked people like you in the eye and said, no." She turned directly toward the camera, locking eyes with the audience watching from home. "And here's the question you should be asking," she said, her tone razor sharp. "When did we become a country where speaking the truth comes with a price tag?" That line shook the audience. People blinked, shifted, whispered. Jeanine looked stunned, but tried to save face. "You'll learn that actions have consequences, Karoline. Especially when those actions are reckless." Karoline smiled, chillingly cool, like someone who had already won. "I agree," she said. "That's why I'm still here. And why your legacy is falling apart in real time." Mic drop. The show wrapped up moments later, but the fallout had only begun. The internet exploded with clips of Karoline's statement. TikTok edits, YouTube reaction videos, political commentary, it was everywhere. People weren't just talking about the confrontation, they were replaying it like a cultural moment. And Jeanine? She went radio silent. Was this the moment the old guard finally realized they couldn't control the next generation? The days following the confrontation were nothing short of seismic. Karoline's fiery takedown of Jeanine Pirro wasn't just a headline, it became the story. Cable news, late-night shows, and even political podcasts were dissecting her words like they were Supreme Court opinions. Hashtags like #KarolineStrikesBack and #100MillionMeltdown trended globally for over 72 hours. Meanwhile, Jeanine had gone dark. No statements. No appearances. No tweets. A silence that spoke louder than any rebuttal ever could. But Karoline? She wasn't done. She appeared on a primetime segment just 2 nights later, invited by a network that had once considered her too controversial. The host leaned in, eager to stoke the fire. "Karoline, did you anticipate that kind of backlash from Piro?" Karoline didn't flinch. "I expected fear disguised as authority. I just didn't expect her to fold so fast." Boom. That quote alone set off another wildfire. Online forums erupted with debates. Some labeled Karoline as disrespectful, others praised her for finally saying what everyone else was too scared to. A viral tweet summed it up best. Jeanine Pirro tried to bury Karoline in court, Karoline buried her in public opinion. And perhaps the most surreal twist? An internal leak from Jeanine's legal team surfaced. Allegedly, there had never been any intention to pursue the fine. It had been a bluff. A public scare tactic meant to rattle Karoline and make her backpedal. It failed. Public trust in Jeanine nosedived. Her sponsors pulled ads, and her network began quietly distancing itself from her brand. Meanwhile, Karoline gained followers, donors, and a renewed surge in influence, especially among the very demographic Jeanine used to dominate. Now, let's pause here. How did a single confrontation flip decades of political dominance? That's the question echoing across Washington. It wasn't just the words. It was who delivered them, when, and how. Karoline didn't just defend herself, she flipped the script. She didn't just respond, she rewrote the rules. And maybe that's why this hit so hard. Because it wasn't just about Karoline and Jeanine. It was about a generation that refuses to be bullied into silence anymore. The studio was dimmed, the lights softened. Karoline Leavitt sat across from a newscaster known for not holding back. This time, however, it wasn't an ambush, it was an opportunity. An opportunity to address what had become one of the most polarizing political face-offs in years. The host wasted no time. "You knew Piro would come for you. What made you push back the way you did?" Karoline took a breath, her gaze steady. "Because this isn't just about me. This is about every young woman who's been told she's too inexperienced, every voter who's been told they don't understand the system, and every voice that's been drowned out by power and ego. Jeanine Pirro tried to silence me with a $sign. I answered with truth. It wasn't just a soundbite. It was a shot across the bow, a warning to every political heavyweight who thought intimidation was still the game. And it landed. Karoline continued, exposing the double standards, the elitist tactics, and the political theater that had kept people like Piro in the spotlight for too long. She called out the media hit jobs, the political fundraising masquerading as lawsuits, and the illusion of strength wrapped in a courtroom threat. In that moment, she wasn't just defending herself, she was torching the blueprint. And while some might say Jeanine's silence was strategic, the truth was far simpler, she had no response. The $100 million claim? Dead in the water. The network's confidence in Piro? Evaporating. Viewers began to turn, not just out of entertainment, but out of respect for someone who didn't blink when the system turned on her. Karoline's message was loud and clear, "I'm not here to play by their rules. I'm here to break them." And then she dropped the final blow, a direct message to Jeanine, not shouted, not angry, but calm and deadly precise. "If you wanted a war, you should have picked someone who needed permission to fight back. I never did." The audience sat in stunned silence. The host leaned back, visibly impressed. It wasn't just a mic drop. It was an era shift. And just like that, the tables turned. What began as a calculated move to crush Karoline Leavitt with a $100 million hammer turned into a masterclass in political resilience. Jeanine Pirro thought she could use the weight of her legacy and media power to silence a rising voice, but instead, she handed Karoline a stage, a spotlight, and the microphone. This wasn't just a win in a debate. This was a reckoning. Karoline didn't back down. She didn't fold under pressure. She stood her ground, tore apart the accusations, and dismantled the image of untouchable elitism, not with rage, but with reason. And here's the part no one expected. She didn't just defend herself. She exposed a system that's been rigged by power and protected by fear, and she did it live. So ask yourself, when the old guard comes for the next voice of change, will they be ready, or will they crumble again? Because after this moment, one thing is clear. Karoline Leavitt isn't the future of politics, she's the correction. And that correction just hit like a freight train.